Hello, my dear students. Hope you are doing great. Today we will talk about some functions or some processes that help materials get into and outside of the cell. Today we will talk about diffusion and osmosis. Our key concept is the materials move across membranes because of concentration differences. We will study the concentration differences and how the materials get in and out of the cell. We have two main ideas here. Number one, diffusion and osmosis. These are two different processes, are type of passive transport. We also will study what is the meaning of passive transport. Number two, some molecules diffuse through transport proteins. So we will study the transport proteins. Okay, let's start. Diffusion and osmosis are types of passive transport. Cells almost continually get substances in and out of the cell, import and export substances. If a cell had to expend energy to move every molecule, this will be exhausting to the cell. Cells would require an enormous amount of energy to stay alive. Fortunately, some molecules enter and exit a cell without requiring the cell to do work or to expend energy. Okay, passive transport. What is passive transport? Passive transport is the movement of molecules across a cell membrane without energy input from the cell. So this is the molecules that pass easily across the cell membrane without any energy input. Passive transport may be described as the diffusion of molecules across a membrane. So what is diffusion? Diffusion is the movement of molecules in a fluid or gas from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. Again, diffusion is the movement of molecules in a fluid or gas from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. Diffusion results from the natural motion of particles. Yes, this is the natural motion from high concentration to the lower concentration, which causes molecules to collide and scatter everywhere. Concentration is the number of molecules of a substance in a given volume, and it can vary from one region to another. A concentration gradient, the one that we are talking about, is the difference in the concentration of a substance from one location to another. Like when we said the molecules of a substance move from the higher concentration to a lower one down the concentration gradient. So the concentration gradient is the difference in the concentrations of the same substance in different locations. Molecules diffuse down their concentration gradient from high concentration to lower concentration. Okay, then we move to another example, or this is an example to tell us or to illustrate the meaning of diffusion and the molecules moving, colliding, and scattering. In the tie-dye example, this is named the tie-dye example. The dye molecules, the coloring or the ink molecules, are initially at high concentration in the area where they are added to the water. Once you drop a droplet from this ink or this coloring or dye, so first drop that enter the water, it has the highest concentration of the dye. Then random movements of the dye and water molecules cause them to bump into each other and mix. After some time, you will find that all the water in the cup will be in the same color as the dye, green color. The dye molecules form an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration, which is the rest of the cup. So what happens here at the end? They are evenly spread throughout the solution. This means the molecules have reached dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic means a movement. Equilibrium means equal concentration. The concentration of dye molecules is the same throughout the solution. This is equilibrium. At any part of the cup or the beaker, if you took any sample, you'll find the concentration of the dye is equal at different locations. But the molecules continue to move. We said that molecules are in continuous motion. This is what do we mean by the word dynamic. In cells, diffusion plays an important role in moving substances across the membrane. Like what? Small lipids and other nonpolar molecules, such as carbon dioxide and oxygen, they easily diffuse across the membrane. So they easily move from the area of higher concentration down to the area of the lower concentration. For example, most of your cells continually consume oxygen, which means that the oxygen concentration is almost always higher outside the cell than inside. So oxygen can diffuse easily into the cell without expending any energy. Then we move to another process, which is osmosis. Osmosis, water molecules also diffuse. So this is diffusion, but for water molecules only. So this is the movement of water molecules from higher concentration to lower concentration. This is the osmosis. Okay. Water molecules move across a semi-permeable membrane like the cell membrane from an area of higher water concentration, we are talking about water now, this is osmosis, to an area of lower water concentration. This process is called osmosis. It is important to recognize that the higher concentration of dissolved particles in a solution means the lower concentration of water molecules in the same solution. This is so important. Look at this example. So if you put 1 teaspoon of salt in a cup of water and 10 teaspoons of salt in a different cup of water, the first one would have higher concentration of water because it has lower concentration of dissolved particles or solute. A solution may be described as isotonic, hypertonic, or hypotonic relative to another solution. Okay, note that these terms are comparisons, so we require a point of reference. How come? For example, you may be taller than your coach or taller than you were 2 years ago, but you are never just taller. I cannot say I'm just taller. What do you mean by taller? You are comparing your height now with your height 2 years ago, for example. Likewise, a solution may be described as isotonic only in comparison with another solution. To describe the solution as isotonic by itself, it would be meaningless. So let's start by the first type of solutions, which is isotonic solution. The word iso means equal. Isotonic solution, as you can see, a solution is isotonic only when the cell has the same concentration of dissolved particles as the cell. So a solution is isotonic to a cell if it has the same concentration of dissolved particles as the cell. They have equal concentrations of dissolved particles. So what will happen to the cell in this case? The water molecules move into and out of the cell at an equal rate, so the cell size will remain constant. Then we move to the hypertonic concentration. Hyper means higher. Keep in your mind that when we are talking about a solution, we are talking about the solution outside the cell. Hypertonic means a higher concentration of the dissolved particles. This is so important. A hypertonic solution has a higher concentration of dissolved particles than a cell, so it has a lower concentration of water. Automatically, the opposite is inside the cell. We said higher concentration of dissolved particles means lower concentration of water outside the cell, means higher concentration of water inside the cell. This means that the water concentration is higher inside the cell than outside. So the water will move from higher concentration to lower one. So the water will get or will diffuse out of the cell. As a result, water flows out of the cell, causing it to shrivel or shrink or even die. Then let's come to the hypotonic solution. Hypotonic solution, hypo means lower. So it has lower concentration of dissolved particles than a cell. So this means the water molecules are more where outside the cell than inside. In this case, what will happen to the cell? Water diffuses into the cell. The water will flow into the cell. If too much water enters a cell, the cell membrane could potentially expand until it bursts. And this is the three cases. Isotonic solution, equal concentrations, the cell size remains the same. Hypertonic solution, high concentration of dissolved particles outside, high water concentration inside, so the water will diffuse outside, causing the cell to shrivel. Then we have the hypotonic solution, lower concentration of dissolved particles outside, and lower concentration of water inside the cell. So the water will flow or diffuse into the cell, causing the cell to expand or even shrivel or even burst. Okay, then let's continue. Some animals and single-celled organisms can survive in hypotonic environment. The hypotonic, the ones with expanding the cell. In this case, their cells have adaptations for removing excess water before expanding or bursting. In plants, the rigid cell wall prevents the membrane from expanding too much. So this is a protection of the cell wall to the whole cell. Remember that the pressure exerted on the cell wall by fluid inside the central vacuole provides structural support for each cell and for the plant as a whole. Some molecules diffuse through transport proteins. So we will start talking about the molecules and the transport proteins. Some molecules cannot easily diffuse across the membrane. Okay, so they may cross easily through transport proteins, which are openings formed by proteins that pierce the cell membrane. Okay, we have facilitated diffusion. This is a form of diffusion of molecules across the membrane through the transport proteins. So the facilitated diffusion, this is a form of diffusion. So we mean it is from higher concentration to lower concentration, but of the molecules that can only cross the membrane through transport proteins. Okay, the word facilitate itself means to make it easier. Transport proteins make it easier for molecules to enter and exit a cell, but this process is still a form of passive transport, so it do not use energy. The molecules move down a concentration gradient requiring no energy expenditure by the cell. This is great. There are many types of transport proteins. Most types allow only certain ions or molecules to pass. Some transport proteins are simple channels or tunnels through which particles such as ions can pass. So these are some transport proteins that act as a channel or a tunnel, allowing ions to pass. Other transport proteins are like enzymes or act as enzymes. When bound, the protein changes shape, allowing the molecule to travel to the rest of the way into the cell. So some other proteins, transport proteins, they are like enzymes. They bind to only one type of substance or molecules. When they bind, they change the shape, allowing the molecule to travel the rest of the way into the cell. Okay, I hope you understood this part of diffusion and osmosis and the transport of proteins. See you in the next episode. Thank you guys and goodbye.